Do appreciate again that you joined us today. We are going to be talking about women in aviation communications. Let's go through our panelist list real quick. To start out with today, our introduction will be with Jim Viola, the president and CEO of HAI. Our moderator today is Gina Kvitkovich, director of publications and media for HAI. First panelist is Georgina Hunter-Jones. Saying she's a publisher is an understatement. She publishes Helicopter Life magazine. She's also an author and a speaker. She's also our Salute to Excellence 2022 Communications Award winner. Panelist is also Jen Boyer. She's the principal for Flying Penguin Communications. And we have Elan Head, who is the senior editor of the Air Current, among other things as well. Our webinars are interactive. We encourage you to ask questions, particularly with a group like this. There's a lot of knowledge that is available. Please use the question module to ask your questions. That's usually on the top, the bottom, or the side of your screen. There's also the chat box. Feel free to use that, but we pay most attention to the question module for this webinar. We will do our best to answer questions at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will make the recording available as soon as we possibly can. It usually is at least the next afternoon or possibly Monday, depending on how quickly things render for us. Feel free to share this video link with anybody you like as soon as we get it out. With that, I'd now like to introduce Jim Viola, the president and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Certainly today is going to be one of those really good days. We get the opportunity to hear from several women working in the aviation communications field. So communications is the most important part of everything. Otherwise, how would we accomplish anything? So the topic couldn't be more timely. Also, as Dan mentioned, the FAA Advisory Board just this week released a report, and Dan is going to bring that up so that people can see. And it's about, while the aviation industry is struggling with very real shortage of labor, certainly one of the topics I heard at Heli Expo, they have failed to utilize properly the female labor pool. And as part of the Reauthorization Act of 2018, a Women in Aviation Advisory Board was charged with developing recommendations and strategies for promoting the recruitment and retention of women in aviation. So as Dan said, the report was released yesterday, March 30th, and it shows that there's still much work to do to improve the role of women throughout all of aviation. The report is titled Breaking Barriers for Women in Aviation, Flight Plan for the Future. The report also acknowledges some breakthroughs by women. The board was chaired by Dr. Heather Wilson, one of the first women to graduate from the U.S. Air Force Academy and former Secretary of the Air Force. And I had the pleasure, when I was acting associate administrator for aviation safety, to go over there and actually talk with her on workforce development. However, the report bluntly states that the industry has been largely unsuccessful in meaningfully attracting and retaining and advancing women. We have talked for many years about the shortage of pilots and maintenance personnel, and right in front of us is a solution to that issue. While we all can begin by encouraging girls and women to enter our industry and then demonstrate that we want them to stay and fly and fix and support helicopter and VTOL operations, we cannot afford to ignore a population of potential employees who are so obviously capable of doing the needed work in our industry. Again, Dan will have it up there, the entire report on the web address. And the report does identify the current aviation culture as the biggest barrier that keeps women from entering and staying in aviation. The culture tells them they are not welcome. That is what we need to work on. The report goes on to say that the culture change starts with leadership. So let me, the leader of HAI, say that making VTOL aviation more available to the best and brightest people will lead to a more prosperous and sustainable industry. And now onto the webinar, where you will meet 4 women who excel in communicating about aviation. Each followed slightly different paths and represents the best of our industry. Please allow me to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Gina Kvitkovich, and the editor of Rotor magazine as well as HAI's Director of Publications and Media. She has an unequaled talent for making everyone's words better. She produces an award-winning Rotor magazine, and we are grateful to have her on our staff. Gina, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jim. And now I'd like to welcome Georgina Hunter-Jones, who is the 2022 recipient of the Salute to Excellence Communications Award. Georgina is not only an 8,500-hour pilot, she's written for numerous aviation publications and published several books on flying. She also publishes Helicopter Life magazine. Thank you for joining us today, Georgina, and congratulations for being recognized by the industry for your work.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the award. That was very kind.
So I understand you have your mother to thank for your career?
I do. I wanted originally, you know, when you're that age and you're not at all sure what you want to do. And my mother obviously had another view on things. I mean, I must have said at some point that I was interested in flying, and certainly I spent a lot of time looking at the sky. But that's a lot of children do, spend a lot of time looking at the sky. But anyway, I was at a university and I wanted to go and work in Africa. And my mother did not want me to go and work in Africa. She found this a very scary place, and sort of, she just thought I was bound to be killed. Perhaps because the sort of person I am as well, who knows, wandering around. Anyway, she said that she would pay for me to learn to fly. And that's what started my interest, really. And that's what got me involved. And once I was involved, I did fixed wing flying first. And once I was involved in that, it just grew from there. And it was a very good and useful journey. Now, not everyone, I think, can have such a helpful mother.
But what the deal was, though, for you to get your airplane license. So what lit the fire for you to go to rotorcraft?
Right. Well, that was actually because I'm not that keen on taking responsibility. And the normal progression, really, if you are going to go into fixed wing, is go through teaching and then go into the airlines. Although I think actually when I learned to fly in 1981, so it's a long time ago, and there weren't that many women airline pilots. But nonetheless, funnily enough, my instructors used to talk to me about the idea as though they thought women generally did go into the airlines, which was quite supportive and quite sort of modern of them. But I didn't really think I did want to go in the airlines. The thought of having, I don't know, sort of 300 people whose lives were in my hands always made me a little bit nervous. So anyway, so then a friend of mine just said, why don't you have a go at helicopters? And I had a flight and I thought, yes, this is the way to go. And it just went from there. And I started teaching, and it sort of developed from there, which was, for me, that was an excellent career. And I would always say, look at helicopters. If you're interested in aviation, look at helicopters, because they are just the most fun way of flying.
Yes, and it's a little more active flying than a lot of
yes,
fixed wing work.
That's true. Although now, if you're flying a lot of big helicopters, yes, it's active, but there is a lot more digital. There's a lot more autopilot. There's a lot more than there used to be when I was flying. I mean, just give one example. When in the early days of flying, when we were flying, most helicopter commercial pilots didn't get instrument ratings. Now, you wouldn't ever get a job now as a commercial helicopter pilot without an instrument rating. I mean, it's not even thought about. And I remember talking to someone who'd been flying in very bad weather. And I said to him, well, what did you do? He said, oh, we went down a field and they got a taxi to the place they needed to go. I thought, that will never happen now. You know, it's a completely different environment. So, but that was the sort of the 80s, the 90s, and everything changed in 2000. And, you know, life is quite a different thing. But it also actually, for me, led into, I've always been terribly keen on writing. And even when I was at school or a teenager, I was always writing things, and I like to write articles to the local papers, which of course got rejected usually. But you know, and so helicopters actually started my other love into writing communications, because funny enough, helicopter journals at that point were much more willing to take articles even from a beginner. And even when you're just writing sort of quite naive stuff, I suppose, that, you know, I've just learned to fly and I found this and I discovered this, which of course they knew already, but they were kind of interested in helping you along. And so I started, and I also started writing for local papers about my aviation experience, which funnily enough, they were prepared to take. So, you know, there were lots of avenues suddenly that were open that came from flying in communications as well, which was,
that's actually I'm sorry, that's actually a really good point that we'll maybe some of the other panelists later will touch on. That the skill of writing, but then if you have aviation experience too, then that makes you more marketable.
Well, that's right, because you've got a different knowledge. I mean, a lot of people are writing about art. They probably, as a selection for the local papers, say, or whatever, or in fact, even the Financial Times, because I wrote for them a few articles. They've got a lot of people who write about art or buildings or other things, books, you know, but they probably don't have very many people who want to write about aviation. And partly that is because I'm going to stick my neck out here a little bit here and say, a lot of male pilots aren't actually very good writers. Now,
I'm glad we're not painting with a broad brush here. Okay.
Yes, maybe this is a little bit of a generalization. And I'm sorry, a lot of people in the audience there who are listening, who are both aviators and writers, who say, what? How dare you?
Well, I can see you're going to be our controversial panelist. Well, besides writing about the industry, you've also been an active pilot. You've set a world altitude record in a helicopter and competed in the World Helicopter Championships.
Oh, so, those are wonderful. Yes, we were actually, I think we were slightly lucky in a way, that was the reason that we got involved in the World Helicopter Championships, because I was actually thinking in a strange way that one does think, you know, I'd really like to have a holiday where I could fly out somewhere. Wouldn't that be great? And about 2 days later, a chap called Mike Smith rang me up and said, Georgina, you're a helicopter instructor. I need a helicopter instructor to go with a girl who wants to fly to Russia for a helicopter competition. I thought, what? God, hello, God, thank you. And that's what happened. So we flew together to Russia, and we had never met before, but we took part in the World Helicopter Championships because there aren't that many women's teams. We were able to do it as the only British women's team, and we did, and we competed, and we didn't come bottom in every event. So, you know, we didn't do so badly. We did quite badly, but not so badly.
Well, Georgina, before we bring on our other panelists, I'd like to share with our audience a short video created as part of your Salute to Excellence Award presentation that summarizes your work so far. So I'd like to—
It's very good, I like it.
So I'd like for us both to turn off our cameras, and some magic elves behind the scenes will present the video. Thank you, elves.
Helicopter Association International proudly presents the Salute to Excellence Communications Award, sponsored by Lightspeed Aviation. This award acknowledges creative distinction in disseminating information about the helicopter industry. For more than 35 years, UK resident and Helicopter Life magazine editor Georgina Hunter-Jones has highlighted the importance of helicopters in our everyday lives. While in university, she discovered her passion for the aircraft in a most uncommon way. She wanted to work a summer in Kenya, but her mother offered her a different adventure. If Georgina stayed in the UK, her mother would pay for her private pilot single-engine land airplane license. Georgina went on to earn additional airplane ratings before receiving similar ratings in helicopters. Since earning that first license, Georgina has flown around the world in a variety of helicopters and airplanes, building more than 8,500 hours of flight time. She's even set a world altitude record in a helicopter and has gained UK CAA examiner authorization for both aircraft categories. Not long after she started flying, Georgina began writing for aviation publications as well as others, including the Financial Times, Rotor and Wing, Flight International, Helicopter World, and Flyer magazine. In 1997, she became the editor of Rotorcraft, the periodical of the Helicopter Club of Great Britain. She turned the publication into a full-color magazine and expanded it. In 2004, she developed her own publication, Helicopter Life. dedicated to educating and inspiring current and future helicopter industry members. Georgina's aim has always been to illustrate how helicopters are used in civilian and commercial operations worldwide. Her magazine has covered a diverse selection of subjects, including firefighting, helicopter safaris, film work, air ambulance missions, and charter flights. She also writes regular flight test reports for the magazine for aircraft ranging from the Piston Bell 47 to the Erickson S-64 Sky Crane. Georgina has always supported alternate technologies in the aviation world and has championed small startup helicopter companies looking to make helicopter flying accessible to everyone. A member of the Whirly Girls, Georgina often mentors the next generation of female helicopter pilots. She also dedicates her time to inspiring young people through her writing. Her children's book, Biscuit and Oscar Learn to Fly, opens the world of aviation to young minds. She's also written 2 nonfiction books about her experiences flying across the Atlantic and across Russia. Please join the HAI Board of Directors in saluting Georgina Hunter-Jones, recipient of the 2022 Salute to Excellence Lightspeed Aviation Communications Award.
Georgina, once again, congratulations. Now I'd like all of our panelists to turn their cameras on. Welcome back, Georgina. And now I'd like to welcome Jen Boyer and Elan Head, both of them who are also pilots and writers. And Jen, we'll start with you. Could you just briefly introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm Jen Boyer. I have been flying since 1994 when I first took my my first demo flight, and I was interested in aviation from a very young age, and it took years to become a pilot. But my parents were telling me that no, flight school is not an approved secondary education. We need you to go to college. And my grandmother had always told me, learn to write, because if you can write, you can do whatever else you want to do with it. And gosh, she was right, because everything I've been interested in, there's always a need for writers. And so I found becoming a writer, in fact, the first flight school I talked to, well, they needed some help writing some stuff from a brochure. Maybe they could give me some flight time in response. And they kind of knew that, you know, once I went on that first flight, it was like, I had to keep finding ways to pay for more flying. So it took a long time to get my private, but then another flight school wanted a communications person, and I was able to get hired on there and worked for the rest of my ratings and worked as a helicopter pilot for a number of years, but on the side, writing for the helicopter industry. I started at Rotor, was my first article assignment at HAI, but then was writing for Helicopter World. And Vertical Magazine started. Mike Reno reached out to me and asked me to help him by writing some articles as he started his new magazine. So I've been writing for him and all of those magazines for quite some time, while I was then hired to work for Robinson Helicopter Company, and then later moved back home to the Pacific Northwest and worked for an airline before going off on my own and just continuing my freelance work, both as a marketing writer and publicist, as well as continuing my freelance. But that was how I merged my helicopter flying and my writing careers to where I can get the best of both worlds.
Thanks, Jen. And Elan, what about you? How did you create your career?
So my career was kind of accidental, but I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. So I actually started out as a writer. So I started out as a newspaper reporter. Got into freelance writing and specifically travel writing. I had a nice gig where I got to do a lot of great travel stories. And on one of those assignments, I went for my first helicopter ride. I thought it was amazing. Went home and signed up for lessons, basically. So went through the full progression, became a flight instructor, was a flight instructor for about a year. Did some odd jobs, had the opportunity to move down to Australia to edit Heli News magazine, which I did for a year. And then after that, I moved to Vertical Magazine in 2009. And so I was an editor with Vertical Magazine for many years, until quite recently, actually, and I'm still a contributor to Vertical. So worked extensively with Jen Boyer there. And yeah, so I've had great opportunities with Vertical, writing about helicopters. getting to fly a lot of different great helicopters. And so that's been my career path.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks to all three of you for sharing your time with us today. So are there any steps, like particular training or good advice that you got from mentors? How, if somebody wanted to replicate, to also find this career path where they combine aviation and communications, do you have any advice for them? And actually, I'll just go with Jen. I know Jen always has advice. But then we'll go through the panel.
Hey, Gina. Well, I do a lot of mentoring through, again, another shout out to Whirly Girls. I saw our participant list, and I see there's several of them that are watching today. So, hey, girls, I'm so excited you guys are on board with us. And I get that question a lot too. And to echo what Georgina said, that I've heard from many editors, yeah, there are people that think they can fly, or that think they can write, who are good pilots, and that it can truly be, I think the other way around is a little stronger in some ways. I mean, having some real training in writing has really helped me stand out. I mean, when I started out, I was doing entertainment writing, and talk about, so I have a journalism degree, and that's where I started. Talk about being a little tiny fish in a very big pond. I mean, everybody wants to write about the entertainment industry, and it was very difficult to really break in. But once I started to get into the helicopter industry, super excited. Everything was new and exciting. I could write about anything, and that it really came across. The magazines were like, somebody who can write, who also understands this. This is really valuable. And editors, especially today, are just so overwhelmed that being able to have somebody who knows how to tell a story well in the written form helps save their time, and is really well appreciated. So if you're going to school now, or you have the opportunity to take some classes in writing, and you already have that passion for helicopters, and that's putting those two together is what's going to help you stand out for sure.
Well, as an editor, Jen, I can't tell you how accurate that is, that finding someone who knows aviation and can write is it's a wonderful thing in an editor's day to find that combination. What about you, Georgina? Do you have any, was there anything that you've, obviously your flight training, but was there anything else that was of particular assistance to you in charting your path?
I think having good photographs actually is also a point. Now, of course, there may be some people out there who say that I don't take good photographs, but that is a very useful thing. If you're an editor of a magazine and someone provides an article with photographs, especially when you're doing aviation, and the sort of photographs that people want to read about, that is amazingly useful, because when you're thinking of laying out the magazine and so forth and so on, and you're getting good photographs that illustrate the points that are being made, that is fantastic. But as far as training, I would say that it is quite useful if you start being interested quite young. But on the other hand, if you decide to be interested in your 50s, say, don't not do it, because there are writers and aviators who have started in their 50s. And I can think of one, there's a British one called Helen Krasner, and she didn't actually start taking any lessons at all until she was in her 50s. And yet here she is, she writes for a lot of different publications. I don't know if she wrote before, but she certainly didn't do aviation before. And that's so don't be put off if you're going to do it at a slightly older age as well. Although of course it's easier if you start younger. No, it's just a thought that occurred to me while I was listening to Jen with her very good points there.
Oh yeah, and thanks. Aviation is such a visual medium or a visual industry that people really love the visual aspect of it, and that's what I tell all my the people I work with when I'm onboarding people. Our readers love to see helicopter photos, just love it.
And it's harder than you think to take photographs. Say if you're in an aircraft or even of moving objects, all those things. A little bit of photographic training is quite helpful. It would be quite useful, just as a sort of an added point.
Yes. What about you, Elan? Do you have any anything to share on training or a mentor or anything that advice you could pass along?
Sure. So as an editor who's always in need of both articles and photos, I will say that whatever you can bring to the table in terms of writing or photography is extremely useful. As you pointed out, it's very difficult to find people who have both that aviation knowledge and, are professional writers. And in fact, there's so few of them out there, I would say that a lot of contributors, to Vertical, for example, are pilots or have, very specialized knowledge and, may need a little more help with the writing. And a lot of, the writers who work for Vertical over the years, they had no special background in writing, but have gone on to become very competent writers. And, just by working at it, as you do with anything. And so I think that, you'll definitely find editors in the industry. If you have something meaningful to say, we're here to, help you and help guide your development as a writer as well. But whatever you can do to make our life easier is much appreciated.
Well, and I think that you brought up a good point, Elan, which is, just like flying, writing is a skill and communicating is a skill, which means when we practice it, we get better. There's no magic bean that we all took to make us, good writers. It's more that you start small and you work at it and you try to improve, just like flying.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the point I make to a lot of people is writing never actually gets easy. It's always hard. You get better at it, but there's no way to shortcut the writing process and dash out a brilliant article without putting any effort into it.
Right. So this is a question for all of you, and we'll start with Georgina this time. How does your pilot training help you in your work?
In the writing or, well, both?
Right.
You mean because I teach teach other people to fly? That helps quite a lot too, actually, because you talk to them about what's going on, and as you're teaching them, you're learning a lot from them. So, but maybe that wasn't quite what you meant.
Actually, I just meant that so because there are people, for example, I'm not a pilot, and I do write about.
Oh, I see. Yes, right. Okay. Well, that increases in knowledge, definitely. Some people are able to write totally academically, as you might say, because they can write because they are very interested in a subject without actually practicing it. But I'm not at all like that. I'm much more a sort of hands-on person. And if I'm actually doing it, I find it much easier to write about what I've done. So sometimes it's almost even in a novel form. I remember going flying with the air ambulance in Holland. And afterwards, the girl wrote me a thank you for writing the article. And she said, it felt to me like I was reading a novel, because it actually felt to me when we were doing it a bit like a novel, because we took off and we went out and we found this guy just fallen off he'd fallen off scaffolding and broken his arm. And, but it was all there, the actual experience that we were having. And so it was totally fascinating. Every part of it was fascinating. And I think that gave a great, it gave a great feel of the experience to me when I was writing about it. But as well as that, I mean, everything that you do, you become much more interested in, and so the two things merge in a excellent and a helpful way.
Oh, exactly. What about you, Jen?
Oh yeah, being able to be a pilot and understand the helicopter industry. It's being classically trained as a journalist. I was already naturally curious. So I did quite a bit of going out and interviewing people already for many years before I got into the helicopter industry. So that came very naturally. But then having the passion, knowing about industry trends, challenges in the industry, the particular topic. And I went down to write about somebody who operates jet rangers. I had jet ranger time, and I was able to ask questions about, because I knew about the abilities and the limitations of the aircraft, and I could ask questions when doing a feature on, well, the tail rotor effectiveness at this altitude, how do you get around that? You know, having that background and experience truly just helps you go a little deeper with your stories. And talking with manufacturers, whether it's engine or a component or airframe, having an understanding of their aircraft just really, it helped to build a reputation and trust with the person you're interviewing. And then also in your writing, there's not a lot of looking up or trying to understand what's going on in the operation of the aircraft or the type of operation taking place. You're already sort of familiar with it and can really tell that story confidently.
That was a very good point. I just look to add to Jen's point there about people that you're interviewing having trust in what you're doing. I remember we went to Alaska to interview a chap, and he obviously thought that we were complete dildos, and he wasn't prepared to talk to us at all until I happened to talk about a bit of aviation. He suddenly said, "Oh, are you a pilot?" And suddenly the whole thing changed, and he was much more relaxed. He was much more happier to talk to us. And so, yes, that's absolutely fundamental when it comes to writing and writing about a subject.
Yes, I can imagine. Well, and actually, Elan, do you think that that you're, with your background, that's sometimes that helps you to figure out what the real story is because your familiarity?
Absolutely. And, you know, to the excellent points that Georgina and Jen made, I would just add that being a pilot, kind of by default, a lot of my friends are pilots. And so just as a natural function of that, I tend to hear about what they're concerned about, you know, what the issues in the industry are, what the safety issues are, what they care about. And so that, you know, certainly helps me in finding stories to write about as well.
Is there, and this is is there a great story out there that about our industry that hasn't been told?
They probably don't talk nearly enough about the Sick arrays and their wonderful machine. I don't know if you even know what this is. This is SW4. This is SV6, I think it's called it. Anyway, it's an Argentinian invention that is for training people without actually leaving the ground. So it's a tethered helicopter. And I think there's been very little really written about it, considering what an amazing thing it is. It's a 4-axis machine that can go up and down and change, and it's just like a helicopter, but you can't actually crash it because it's tethered to a post. And it's very little written about. I've written about it lots of times, but apart from me, and I think that's a great story that really needs to be further written. But as it's only, I think he hasn't got very many models. He's maybe got 4 to 6 models now in Argentina. And actually the old man Sick arrays just died anyway. Maybe that's a story that will never happen. I don't know, but it was very interesting. I thought that whole area around it. Maybe South American aviation generally needs a lot more looking into. It's a great area, and there's a lot of aviation there that could well be developed a lot more, I think, in the writing aspect.
Well, yeah, I agree. You're right there. We hear very little about that continent. And while, you know, I understand like Brazil has a very thriving.
Very active, fantastic. Yes, I went to Sao Paulo and flew there from their one of their heliports, and they had so much action there and so much going on. I mean, it was just amazing. But I suppose it's harder to get there, and it's expensive, and it's much easier to write about things that are close home, isn't it? Or where people are actually writing for you. But
yeah, there's less of a travel budget, but we need to actually become a more diverse industry, just even in our communications, and
yes,
and where we're listening to.
But actually, it is becoming much more diverse than it was. I mean, there's a lot more talking about the general ecology of things. All those areas are becoming a lot more broad, where we talk a lot more about drones and so forth and so on, and about electrification and all the things that are going on in the industry. That I think that's amazing and really interesting.
How about Jen or Elan? Do you guys have, or maybe you don't want to give away your story cache?
Well, I think there's something that really needs to be written about heavily, and Elan and I have talked about this a lot, but it's a double-edged sword because we write in the industry for the industry. And so when it comes to really digging into some serious issues that tie into the systemic things that are happening in our industry that cause crashes, like culture, there's a culture issue in our industry, and there's quite a bit that needs to happen in order to save lives and limit these accidents. I mean, it was something we talked about in the webinar last week, I believe, was having a just culture. Just call it pilot error, add something more to the aircraft and move on, when many of us know that culture plays a very big part in it. Whether that's not feeling comfortable saying no to a powerful customer, or having leadership who tell you, unless parts are falling off the aircraft, you're going to fly, or we're going to lose this contract. I mean, there's a lot of culture issues that put pilots in positions to where they feel they have to fly. I mean, a part of why I'm not a full-time pilot anymore is because of culture issues, not just issues along those lines, but also some of the misogynistic stuff that we all deal with as female pilots. But I think that's a story that really needs to be told, and I don't know what the best outlet is for it, because the big publications in our industry are supported by our industry, and so that we run right into the other big issue that we have in the journalism world, which is how free is the press, or as free as your advertisers let you be.
Right.
That's a big issue.
Right. Well, I will agree with you, Jen, that if you, you may have an SMS program, but if you don't have a safety culture supporting it, then in my opinion, it doesn't mean anything without the safety culture foundation. Your SMS is built on sand, so or any other safety program that you might have. Now, Elan, do you have any thoughts on that?
So once again, I'll just reinforce what both Georgina and Jen said. I think those are both great points, and I think they reflect issues with the journalism industry generally. Certainly a lot of news coverage tends to be Western centric and English language centric, and there's so many great stories around the world that I'm sure we're missing because they're not as easy for us as Western English speakers to access. So there's a whole world of stories out there that still need to be told, and sure, telling those important stories that contradict or come into conflict with powerful interests. That's a common theme throughout the journalism industry as well. So in addition to contributing for Vertical, I now write for a subscription news publication, The Air Current, which is completely advertising free. And so that's been a really interesting model to be a part of. And I have no constraints on what I can say there. So,
Wow.
so, enjoying that.
Well, why do you think communications plays such an important role in our industry? Because aviation, it's a very exciting, very dynamic industry. But the work that we all do is, I think I would say that it's our industry, especially to external audiences, is not very well understood. Mm-hmm. And so communicating about it is actually very important, because it would help others to understand, some of why we do what we do, and also why some things happen, the way they do, if that makes any sense. So why do you guys agree with that we should be,
Yes,
that communication is essential for
yes.
for even the sustainability of our industry?
A lot of people don't know in the general public about what is happening in the aviation industry. They don't know that it's as broad as it is. They don't know that it's interested in things like electrification. You only have to see that just recently there have been articles about flying cars. Now, flying cars have been around for a long, long time, and people in the aviation industry have been writing about them for, I would have thought, 20 years. but it's just new to the press, or it seems to be just new. And I think, gosh, how can this be new to them? How can they not know about it? And it's because obviously we haven't communicated enough to let the sort of general public know what's out there as far as things like flying cars. Or someone just asked a question about sustainability there. Yes, and that's now a big issue. I mean, that's huge, isn't it? Now we're looking at what fuel we can use and how we can use electrification, how we can use diversity, whether we can use hydrogen. But all those ideas have been around for a long time, but they haven't been communicated well, clearly, because people don't know they're there. So yes, communication is vastly important. And not least for things like just the magnitude of different subjects that helicopters cover. I mean, probably most people think of helicopters as being police. Damn it, they're circling over my house again. Rich people, that Abramovich is terrible. You know, that kind of thing. That's what people tend to think goes with. I mean, certainly my friends always ask me, why have they crashed again? Those helicopters do nothing but crash. You know, and it's not true, of course, but again, it's because the communication is quite poor and they don't realise, yeah, all the air ambulance is funded by you, really, and all this sort of thing that people need to know. So yes, communication is vastly important. It is in all industries, but it is particularly in helicopters.
Yeah, and I would add to what Georgina is saying, and it's not just on the publications to be out there telling this story. It's on every company that operates a helicopter or even manufactures important parts for a helicopter, such as engine manufacturers and large component manufacturers. Telling the story of the helicopter industry is on everyone. When, you know, there's downturns, some of the first people in our helicopter industry that get let go are the marketing and communications people. And I would argue that these are the people that you need the most all the time. And at the same time, you've got smaller operators, you know, small flight schools, small charter operations that don't have anybody in communications. So there's nobody who knows the local press, the aviation press, who can get the word out or tell the story about what's going on in your community. And that puts you on the defensive. So the community group gets together and starts fighting you and your operation based off of the noise, the perceived pollution that you're creating with your one helicopter. All of these different things, they'll get a lot of coverage. They'll get heard, whether it's on social media or in the regular media, and your operation isn't prepared to respond to that. You have not prepared basic talking points, let alone have anybody who can respond to it. And so I would argue that having a communications person or team in any operation through our industry, telling that story, if everybody who operated a helicopter were telling that story in their communities, I think we could have a really collective effect on understanding and perception. And then, God forbid, when there is an accident, you've already been telling your story. There's a way to build on it instead of, you know, we only respond because our helicopters crashed and we have to say something.
Yeah, it is very much bringing the local community into it, like football. You know, it's sort of, well, you could all come and have a flight or whatever. It'd be nice if everyone knew that sort of helicopters were just really big footballs. Yeah, in a way.
Well, I worked at a large helicopter flight school for a couple of years, and yeah, there was a group of homeowners in a trailer park on the other side of the airport that got together and wanted to have the helicopter company shut down, but they had not done anything in terms of speaking out. And I came on board, and it was just then it was an uphill battle to work with the local media, invite them out, have them fly, and learn about the support that we gave in a lot of other areas. It's that communications person works with the team to come up with what's our story, how are we going to tell our story positively, how are we going to get the information out about us. You have to start off as the protagonist, otherwise you're the antagonist.
That's a good point.
Yes. Well, we actually have some questions from our audience. Holly Boniface asked and this is addressed to the panel, how do you write about controversial subjects?
Carefully. It depends what sort of controversial subjects they are, obviously. With sensitivity, because obviously, you know, with every controversial subject, there's more than one side. So you need to look at every point, you need to look at a subject in every direction, because it can be, if you try and just put the helicopter point of view and not the other person's point of view, that can be very upsetting for everybody. And I think we all know that, because we've all probably had bad press at some point or other. And you need to be able to get a good unbiased view from everyone. So you need to interview a lot of different people and show why some people think one thing and one people another thing, and what there is to resolve it. I think that's how you have to deal with controversial issues, as you do in life. You know, it's not only in communications, it's also in everything that comes up with you. You've got to be looking at the bigger picture as far as you can.
Oh, that's a good point, Georgina. I mean, by definition, if it's controversial, that means there's more than one side.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yes.
What about you, Elan?
I think anyone who knows me knows I love controversial stories. I've dug into many of them over the years, and I have to give Mike and Linda Reno at Vertical credit for always being incredibly supportive. So yes, I think that with any controversial subject, you do need to, really do as much research as you can and understand the issue very well and understand both sides and the arguments on both sides. I would say that doesn't mean you have to stay neutral. In some, areas, I do think that there is a compelling argument to favor one viewpoint over another, especially when it comes to things like safety or equity. I'm okay with being a champion for safety, for example. And I've found that even with my very controversial articles, as long as I'm fair to all parties and, present, their arguments accurately and the facts such as they can be established accurately, I really haven't gotten as much pushback as you might expect.
It's good.
Okay. Yeah. Georgina, this is a question eventually for you, but so at one point in the FAA report that Jim mentioned when he was introducing the webinar, it has a lot of great information for anyone interested in growing the aviation workforce, whether that's focusing on women, minorities, or just the general population. For example, it says that 46% of women currently working in aviation had become interested in the field by the age of 15. So this really underscores the importance of reaching potential aviators, both boys and girls, early.
At school.
So, again, this is a question from Holly Boniface. How long ago did you write your children's book, and was that one of your motivations for writing it, Georgina?
It was, yeah, for sure, to interest children in it. But I have written other children's books that have been around flying as well, but slightly sort of different. But yes, I think that you do need to make let's say young girls aware that they are able to fly, because there's always a lot of myths around flying and children. And I have to tell you that someone told me that a young girl, she was about 12, I think, said that she wanted to fly, and all her schoolmates told her women don't fly. Now, I've also heard this about doctors, that a girl wanted to be a doctor, and she was a black girl, and she said, I want to be a doctor. And her mother said, don't be silly, black girls do not become doctors. Whoa, so there's a lot of information that needs to be told to kids and girls particularly, because everyone knows boys fly. It's not an issue there. And you need a lot of role models. The more role models you can get, I think that the more it helps, and the more that schools are actually presenting this as something that is done normally. Now, my goddaughter flies for the air ambulance in Norfolk, and she actually does a lot of work with schools. And she goes around, she's been back to her own school, but she's been to other schools as well. And people are always amazed, because she's still young, she's pretty, she's got 3 children, and she flies full time for the air ambulance. That sort of, they just can't believe that they can do that. Yes, you can. She does. So many others can. But they tend to think that perhaps you've got to either be a pilot or have children. Well, no, there she's a very good example of you've got both. So that those are all sort of, sometimes people give them limiting factors they don't realise. So telling them that those limits aren't actually there, and that you've got the availability of all this. And of course, the one other big thing is cost. Now, it is quite expensive to learn. Now, a lot of places are like the Whirly Girls are now providing scholarships, and that does help. But it's an issue always for people wanting to learn to fly, because the younger you are, the less money you're likely to have. And so somebody has got to support it. Either you've got to find a way, you've got to work, and Jen was saying she worked in lots of different ways, or you've got to have someone to support you, or you've got to have a scholarship. So there's got to be other external things. So yes, industry needs to promote that too.
Yeah, that was the creativity, putting my writing skill to work and going to these companies and offering to help with marketing, help with writing, help telling their story. They got my foot in the door. So if this is a dream that you have, share using what you know how to do. I think anybody who's become a pilot has their own story on how they raised the money to become a pilot. And those of us that were unable to, or did not choose a military career path to where you would have those valuable GI funds. That's how they do it in the US. I'm not certain how it would be in other countries, but there are definitely funds in the United States. If you did not learn to fly in the military, you still have those funds at your disposal to use to later learn once you're out of the military. That was not an option for me, so it was finding another way to be creative, to get into it. So even if you want to be a mechanic or an engineer, or any other area that's not particularly flying, but it's definitely a part of the helicopter industry, because helicopters are just so cool. You got to be a part of it. If you use those other talents, you never know what'll get you in.
Exactly. Well, and speaking of this, and you know, all three of you have had, you know, decades in as a pilot. Have you seen the just decades? I didn't say how many.
A lot of decades in my case.
Have you? Do you think you've seen the industry become more welcoming?
Yes.
Have you seen positive movement in where we're going?
Oh, definitely. When I started teaching, I used to have people come up to me and say the most extraordinary things. And I had one girl, you probably don't know the slang here, but this is British slang. She realised that her father was going to do a lesson with me, and she yelled at him, "Hey, Dad, you're going to fly with a bit of posh totty," which translates as well, an unusual woman. Anyway, basically, yes, that was early days of flying. I had a guy say to me, "What? Are you safe?" Whereas you don't get that now. Honestly, I you know, in the later career, I never had anybody question whether a woman was safe or all those kind of things. So I think, yes, it's much more welcoming than it was. And there obviously are still issues, but and again, it depends which industry you're in. You know, again, going by what my goddaughter said, the air ambulance is a very welcoming industry for women, particularly because a lot of the workers, a lot of the doctors are female, and the paramedics and so forth. But the oil rigs have a very, very macho culture, and they are not so welcoming for women. However, I was talking to a man about this, and he said they're not very welcoming for men either. He said the oil industry is a very hard industry to work in for pilots. So it's interesting that it's not only women that suffer from a little bit of unwelcomeness sometimes, it's also other men. So it's a thought to bear in mind.
Well, I think that's I mean, a really good point. And I've noticed in my experience in the industry that, you know, a lot of people aren't, you know, explicitly trying to exclude women or, you know, explicitly discriminating against women. A lot of times I've found that men are so busy performing for other men, and there's just such a focus on, you know, this macho masculine culture that, like, you know, women, yes, are excluded kind of incidentally, but the point is not to exclude women. You know, the point is because, like, there is this culture that's so masculine and macho, and that's bad for a lot of men too. You know, it's toxic. So, and, you know, I think there's benefits for both women and men by moving to a more inclusive culture.
Yeah, and actually there is one thing that you are in some ways more supported if you're a woman, because people are all so amazed to see women in there that as a minority, that they are quite sort of pleased, I think, to see you. And there is a lot of help from other women, and probably from quite a lot of men too. And if you read the book about it's called Open Skies, it's about the one Afghan military female pilot who she really worked with the Americans, but she worked for the Afghans. But she was saying the older men there in Afghanistan were much more supportive than the younger men, which is just an interesting factor. It's a good book to read, actually, Open Skies, if you get a chance. It's a very interesting book. I can say from
my experience on the communication side, because we all have similar experiences in seeing the helicopter side, and yes, there are becoming more women. I know there was one question about what percentage of women are in the helicopter industry, and I do not know that answer. The Whirly Girls, the number of Whirly Girls is still not the full number of female helicopter pilots out there, so that would probably be a good research question for the FAA, as they have the data on all the pilots, the rated pilots. But on the communications side, when I first started as a journalist in the helicopter industry, and I had to interview all of these manufacturers and operators, I was dealing mainly with men, whether it was actual communications people hired by these companies. They were men in these positions, and often maybe they were a PIO in the military. They didn't have a lot of background in communications, or they just been at the company a while and knew how to talk about it. But that was what I ran into a lot. Today, there are a lot of communications people that are women, and it is so much easier to do my job. I have to tell you, these ladies were trained to be communicators. They took the time to learn. Some of them came from aviation backgrounds. Others were just fascinated with it and absorbed it like a sponge. But these are some of the most professional aviation communications people I work with are the women in these manufacturers. I mean, I'm looking at you, Sikorsky and Bell, and there's some amazing ladies out there now doing communications for companies. Don't overlook that. If getting just being a journalist, I mean, being a communications person, and a female, you know how to tell the stories, and you're passionate about your topic. It comes across, and it just makes, especially those of us that need to get information from your company, just so much easier. That's true of salespeople too. Actually, I don't know if you noticed that they've also changed. They used to be entirely male, and now a lot of them are female. Yeah, it's very interesting there. There's a general sort of movement in the workforce, I think, that has become much more female.
We, we're nearly at 5 o'clock, but we have a few more questions to go. Would you guys mind if we stayed a few minutes longer and addressed some of the additional questions? Fine. Just for about 15 minutes or so. Raven S asks, wrote, I work in a communications position and am interested in furthering my career in aviation as a helicopter pilot. How can I mix the two in Alaska? And first of all, I have a feeling that that's an excellent, I'm just guessing you're going to say that is an excellent place to try to mix the two, because Alaska has a thriving general aviation sector, and of course, and it's unique enough environment that there's lots of stories to tell. But Elan, I'll let you see if there's anything to add to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing that's really been nice about the past couple of years, especially, is, I think people are so much more open to, remote work, remote positions. So, if you're interested in, say, writing about the industry, I think there may be more opportunities for you to tell stories from Alaska than before. If you are, looking at breaking into the industry, from your current communications position, I found that when I was, going through my flight training, having that, journalism experience and those journalism outlets was so helpful, because it gave me so many opportunities to, learn more, meet more people, make connections that a lot of my fellow students didn't have. So, be creative, just be open to every opportunity you can chase. And I think you'll be able to mix the two in some interesting ways.
It's a thought that Alaska has quite an interesting reputation around the world. It might be that you could write for other publications that might be, publications in Europe as well, because Alaska has quite a name for flying. So it might be that you could broaden out to not just within America or maybe to outside.
I was going to say that I met so many other communications professionals by going to Heli Expo. I mean, there's the media room where all of the writers are. So I've met a number of writers of other publications at different on different continents who have taken my card, and I'll get a call from time to time. Hey, are you in this general area? Could you do a story on this? Or I could pitch a story too. So that's something to keep in mind for networking. And if Raven, what you're asking about is to become a helicopter pilot, I mean, once you start that journey, there are several flight schools in Alaska, but once you start that journey, I would definitely get involved with the Whirly Girls. That is the tightest knit group of people who network and support each other that I've come across in our industry. So a bunch of them would jump in and oh, well, I know somebody, and that's a really good way. I mean, all three of us have gotten very far through networking and the people we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're such a small industry, which is great because the connections that people build, and because we're a global industry, you end up knowing people all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote for a Japanese magazine for a while, which was very nice. It's unusual, but it's obviously in English. My Japanese isn't very good.
I have a question from Kim Barwick, who asked, again, and I'll send this to, we'll go one by one. What's one piece of work that you're very proud of or you feel has made an impact?
I wrote one about firefighting. I thought was fantastic. I went out with the firefighting team and they let me, well, I did some practicing with the buckets and so forth, and then afterwards went out with them. And I thought that was so interesting and so useful, and they were so helpful. And it was really just, I learned so much, and I hope I communicated it well. No, that's what I would say. It was just fascinating.
What about you, Elan?
Oh, that's a tough question. I have many stories that I'm proud of. I have to admit, I can get discouraged sometimes, though. I write a lot of safety-related stories, and sometimes I feel they haven't had the impact I would like them to have, because obviously there's still a lot of safety issues in the industry. So, in terms of impact, I'm probably not the best judge of that, but I've been very fortunate over my career to be able to chase the stories that I'm passionate about and really interest me. So.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I still remember. I still remember some of your stories, so they made an impact on me. So.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I was your target audience, but and Jen?
Yeah, when I see those juicy things, I'll send them to Elan because I know she can go after them with some amazing answers out of people. It's hard because 30 years of writing. There have been so many stories, some that have made a big impact on me. And like Elan was saying, we really don't have feedback on how it impacted others. But one that I was particularly proud of more recently was just why insurance was getting so expensive. What was the story behind insurance? And that's not a super sexy topic, but the cost of insurance suddenly jumping up was really affecting everybody in our industry. And I got really lucky to find a couple of insurance brokers that were willing to talk on the record and really give me a deep background on how the insurance industry works. And it was absolutely fascinating. And it was very interesting to kind of find the ins and outs. It wasn't just your helicopter insurance is going up. It was because there's more fires, there's climate change, there's more hurricanes. Insurance is connected across the board because insurance companies they're putting all their eggs in a bunch of baskets, and when all the baskets get stepped on at the same time, everyone suffers. So watch for your car insurance to go up was basically what we were being told at the same time. But it was fascinating to learn all of that. And I would really hope, I'd heard, from my editor and a few others in the industry that in the communication side, like that was really helpful. That really helped me better understand what was going on. So I'm hoping that one made a level of impact for folks. But of course, I wish I could say it was like one of the really cool, fun helicopter flying ones. I think people just enjoy reading those and seeing what it's like at different operators. And I think they all have an impact to some level. And hopefully they inspire people too.
Exactly. And yeah, the story that you just told me about your insurance article, helping to explain the world, because that's part of our world. And it's not writing about insurance never sounds sexy, but on the other hand, it's talk about information people can use, to improve their lives or help them cope with help their business survive. That sounds impactful. The Mark Many, first of all, offers congratulations to Georgina and to the other panelists on the years of hard work that has put you where you are now. And he says, in light of my own experience with some male pilots in the industry, would you consider that your hidden talent, that writing helps you to develop a better sense of empathy for other people, or whether that's coworkers or customers or the flying public? Do you think that being a writer helps you to understand people better?
Yeah, I think the two things
is that a muscle that you've practiced over the years?
The two things go hand in hand, I think, because you're more interested in people and you're more empathetic and more sympathetic to their different types of feeling, you want to write about it. And because you write about it, you investigate more and you discover more and you feel more. So I think those things are very closely interlinked. And I think that's true in all types of writing, that the more you're interested in people and sensitive to their cares and needs, the more you the more you improve your writing. But actually, that was something I was going to say, that I thought that female writers did a bit better than male writers, in that a lot of male writers write about the, let's say, the nuts and bolts of the industry, whereas a lot of female writers tend to be looking a bit more broadly and also into the personalities involved. And that may be just the type of writing that they do. But it's quite interesting to have a good cross-section of both in a magazine, because you get sort of the technical aspects and the less technical aspects. And I think that's a very good thing in a magazine.
And I will speak up for the men. So, certainly at Vertical, we have some men who have written great human stories over the years. So one I'm thinking of specifically is Dan Megna. He's written some amazing, human stories that have just been like such great tales. But I do think that, just the process of, being a journalist specifically, where you spend time with people, asking them questions and hearing what they have to say and digesting that and figuring out how to communicate that to other people. I mean, you necessarily have to be empathetic and try to understand where they're coming from and their point of view. And certainly I feel very fortunate to spend a lot of my time talking to fascinating people and telling their stories.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful elevator speech for your career. What do you do? I talk to fascinating people and learn fascinating things, and then tell other people about them. And Jen, do you have any? Do you want to make any comments? And I do think it's I would be remiss if I didn't say that we're moving. We really want to move away where we're stereotyping people, and it should be that we are recognizing everyone's value, and we wouldn't want we wouldn't want to just, the point of equity is not to turn it upside down, but to even it out. And
Yes, to broaden the picture.
yes.
Yeah.
No, all I would add is to what Elan was saying. I mean, we're trained as journalists to listen and find, what's being said and what's not being said between the lines to really understand a person. And that's not just helpful for writing journalistic articles. It's helpful for communications across the board. And, it's certainly, that training certainly helps me be a better flight instructor, because I was able to really pay attention and listen to what my students were needing and better identify which way that they were learning, so that, as a flight instructor, a different way to try to help them get a skill, master a skill that they might have still been struggling with. So certainly just that inherent skill we had that put us towards becoming writers, like Georgina. I mean, I wrote all kinds of stories when I was a kid too. We just like to write. And so that drew us towards our careers. We were already kind of had that lean towards listening and wanting to hear stories and share them. So I agree with what these wonderful ladies were saying. It's absolutely, I think it does have a piece. I just never thought of it that way. So that was neat to bring that up and have us think of it in that aspect.
Well, and this will be my final question. This is from, let me see if I have a name attached to this, Marvin. And he writes that he's a student pilot, but he's helping his current school develop programs to reach out to women pilots. And he said, any advice on how he could, any advice on, how messaging or how to reach out to the female audience to bring them in. And one thing we've talked about is just, there's a lack of awareness that, people may hear someone say that that's not, you can't fly, to use Georgina's example. But once you get beyond awareness, what would you, what would your message be to, how would you encourage a woman you met to, reach out to aviation or to consider aviation? What would you say?
I'd say, if you think this is something you're going to enjoy, try it, because the worst that can happen to you is you don't like it, and then you don't do something else. But try it, because that is the only way you're going to find out. But I do think it's good that they're reaching out, because quite often people think, oh, it's not for me. But then if someone says to you, try it, then it is worth it. Then you find out. I mean, honestly, I didn't really think about it until I took that first flight, and then suddenly my whole attitude changed, and borders were opened, and what can you say? Suddenly the fun of it was all there, and tell them all about it. Tell them that there are scholarships available, because the cost is often a thing that comes up, particularly in the UK. I think more than perhaps in the States, that this is going to be an expensive thing. But tell them they will be able to afford it if there are scholarships available and so forth. So just tell them all the things that are available and let them try it and enjoy it and see what happens. I did actually work for a guy once who wanted to encourage people of all sexes, ages, whatever, and he would give them 10 minutes free flying. And it's amazing how many people converted from that 10 minutes just because it was so much fun, so enjoyable. So I think, yes, give them a little taster and they'll find a lot of people will come.
One thing that we do here in Seattle, and I know it's done around the country, different organizations, and here we have the Museum of Flight, and so they really help out with this, but they have women fly events. And a part of those events are providing a flight experience for girls. I saw a whirly girl on here earlier who had done that in the helicopter, the Tethered Helicopter School, and donating the helicopter for the day to give these free flights to these women. My own daughter went for an airplane flight as a part of it. And just, so maybe if you're writing grants to get money, maybe to support something like Women Fly, where you're actually making a big deal about it. It's for girls, where I'm trying to get females interested in this. And the local Whirly Girls can certainly help. They've got a connection and know who's working at what flight schools and can get the word out. And Women in Aviation is another great resource for finding ways to reach out. They may know other places, other examples, people who take the time to help put these together that can help you with that. So those are a couple of good resources.
And I'll just make one point about social media, because I think, social media is a great way to reach, broad, diverse audiences these days. But a warning that I always point out whenever I'm discussing this is at Vertical Magazine, we found that, Facebook was actually not showing our posts to women. And if you Google my name, yes. So if you Google my name and how Facebook shuts women out of male dominated industries, you can find a blog post that I wrote on this that has some tips for how to explicitly boost and target your posts in ways that they'll actually be seen by women and not just by men. So that's something to be aware of as you're planning outreach efforts, is that there may be algorithms working behind the scenes that reinforce these stereotypes, even when you are not trying to.
I've read your post, Elan, and very eye-opening. So thank you. Well, I think that's about all we have time for. So I want to thank Georgina, Jen, and Elan for participating in this webinar. I very much appreciate your time, and I hope our audience found it as fascinating as I did. So thank you very much. We can turn off our cameras now, and I'll turn it back to Dan Sweet. Thank you, Dan.
Well, hey, please allow me to express my appreciation too. This was a fascinating afternoon for me. I enjoyed the discussion immeasurably. That's one of the things I really enjoy about doing these webinars. Like Elan said, you get to talk, you get to listen to fascinating people, you get to learn fascinating things, and obviously we get to share them. So please allow me to express my appreciation to Elan, to Jen, to Georgina, to Gina, and allow me to congratulate Georgina one more time as well. Appreciate the time this afternoon. Do have a few housekeeping things to get into just really quickly. Want to make sure that we share this information one more time. The information on the FAA report on women in aviation. We think it's very much worthwhile taking the time to download, take a look at it. Please use your phone, capture the link, scribble it down on whatever paper's close by, and I'll hold it for just another minute or two or 10 seconds or so before we move on. So. Okay, coming up, save the date. The next series of webinars we have, finally getting things flattened out, stretched out, smoothed out after Heli Expo. Next week, we have Kim Hutchings coming on. She's an expert on human factors, and she will be talking on human factors. And so that's another webinar that I'm really looking forward to. It's not an area that I know enough about. On April 14th, we will be celebrating Coast Guard Air Station Cape Cod. If you're not aware, they actually had 3 Salute to Excellence Awards winners from the air station this year. They had a 4th person who was the pilot of the year last year. There's got to be something in the water up there. And so please join us to hear their stories. And on April 21st, it's another one that sounds like a lot of fun. We will have a Salute to Excellence flight instructor of the year, and joined by John and Martha King, aviation educators extraordinaire. So it's going to be a great evening that day as well. We do appreciate your feedback. We will be sending out a survey shortly. We do ask you to spend just a couple of minutes to let us know what you thought of the webinar, what we could improve. If you have ideas for upcoming topics, we are grateful for topic ideas. We've been doing these webinars for about 2 years, and so we really want to know what the audience would like to see. We have some great ideas. We have some great subjects coming up. But if there's something particular that you really want to hear us talk about, we can find subject matter experts to address it. Please let us know. Equally, if you have ideas about what HAI could do for you, for the industry, we'd like to know that as well. Or if you have suggestions on things that we may not be doing correctly, or things we're doing too much of, we're always looking for contributions. Please send Jim Viola an email at president@rotor.org with your challenges, your suggestions, your ideas. He reads every one of them. He does send them to staff for tasking. That does conclude our webinar for this week. We are grateful that you took time out of your schedule to join us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. I will be on vacation. We have Greg Brown stepping in as Director of Education to moderate the webinar. Until then, until I see you again, please be safe and fly safe.